to look at another aspect of pricing, in particular price determination. Right? Because when we go to purchase our goods, it is given a value by the producer or the manufacturer or the retailer that is selling that good or those goods. So price determination is a very important aspect for every business. We've looked at the strategies that are used by businesses, but then there are two key factors within an economy that also plays a great role in determining price. Determine the prices that are set for products or services. So basically, consumers, as we know, they or we desire certain goods and services to supply our needs, and it is the mandate of the producers to therefore manufacture and supply these goods in order to meet these demands. Now, how does government fit in all of this? Now, of course, in an economic system where we have the government and the private sector both complementing each other in terms of managing the economy or contributing to the economy to make sure it grows and develop well. Government also play a minor role but does not really interfere with the determination of prices. So what we find, as we know, government's role is mostly regulatory, and what we find in this regard is that governments intervene by setting price control regulations. Right? So government does not determine prices, but there are price control regulations where prices are fixed or price ceilings are fixed for certain goods, prohibiting the producers or the retailers from crossing a certain level in terms of pricing. And this is all to protect consumers so that certain basic goods that are needed are available and accessible to persons who may not be in the position to afford it if the producer had the freedom of setting the price to suit their objective of profits. Right, so that is the role that government plays in that regard of prices. So, what is demand? Demand refers to the quantity required by us consumers at a particular price at a point in time or a particular time. So, that quantity that we need and are willing to purchase at the price at that time is what we refer to as demand. So therefore, demand has a relationship, right, um, with the factor of price. So what therefore is that relationship? Do we see any change occurring between demand based on changes that occur within price? Now, these are things that we could observe um, as consumers ourselves. So when we look at demand, meaning um, our willingness, right, to acquire a certain quantity, right, as consumers from these producers at a given price at a given time, do we see any relationship between this factor and price? And the answer is there is a relationship, and there is actually a law, and the law basically states that when the price of any product increases, you generally see the demand falling, right? And when the price decreases for that product, you generally see demand will increase within that market. So therefore it means that price and demand do have an interaction or relationship, and based on the changes that occur within price, we therefore see a change occurring between with demand, and this is referred to as the law of demand. When there's a change in demand, right? So let us look at the example here, a Starbucks coffee being the product. On the y-axis of the graph, you will see price being plotted, whereas on the x-axis of the chart, you will see before there is a schedule, right, that is used to plot the graph. So the same thing applies on the x-axis. We have quantity demanded, and on the y-axis we have price. So as we see in the schedule, when the price changes, right, meaning increases, we notice that the number of apples in terms of quantity demanded keeps getting less and less, right? And that again plots a downward sloping curve, which means that price and quantity demanded is inversely proportional to each other, right? Again, going back to the law, when when price increase, demand will fall. There are some products that demand for it changes and it has nothing to do with the price of the product. So for instance, substitutes, complementary goods. If those items, if the prices were to change, then we'll see changes. Like the example illustrated here. French fries is complemented with ketchup. So those two goods go together. If the price of French fries were to double or to increase, then you may notice that the demand for ketchup will probably decline. Why? Because persons are now expending more for the main product, which is demanded, and therefore the complementary goods may feel the effect of that, right? So other factors besides price of the product itself could have an impact on demand for that product. Another example is expectation of changes in the future. So look at our situation now with the pandemic. We are not sure what the future may be in terms of when things may change. So there are certain products that we would have demanded them in higher quantities before, but because of our uncertainty of the future right now, we would have changed our demand. Right? So market demand for certain goods would have probably declined due to expectations of the future and how things would turn out. Then we have population or the number of buyers. This, of course, because consumers are the ones that are creating that demand for the product. If that number was to increase or decrease, then we'll also see some change in demand despite the price of the product. Income of the consumer. So there are persons now who are unemployed. are they going to be able to demand certain goods the same way they would have demanded it before? So clearly, in certain industries and certain markets, we're going to see that because of decrease in income, some products, the demand would have declined greatly because of that change in buyer's income. And then we have change in taste. People's preferences change, and based on the buyer's scale of preference, meaning how much they value that item or how much they want it in comparison to other items or other commodities, then we may also see that affecting demand. So the price of the product can remain unchanged, but then there are other factors that may change and cause that product to be demanded less or more. So we call these non-price factors that affects demand. I'm going to illustrate that in my next slide. So what causes demand to change? Right? Meaning not price. And I've just listed those factors for you. All the factors that I've listed previously causes demand to shift or to change without a change in the price of that product itself. Right? So these non-price factors could cause demand to shift either to the right, causing a rightward shift, as we say, which is an increase in demand. Because remember, when you move to the right, the quantity on the X scale is increasing, whereas when you move to the left, which is a leftward shift in demand, the demand quantity is decreasing. Now, what would cause decrease and increase in demand? An increase in demand would be caused by a favorable change, right? So if something favorable occurred, let's say like buyer's income rise due to a pay increase, then that could lead to demand increasing for particular products in that market. But if there is an unfavorable change, like we're experiencing a pandemic, persons have lost income, lost jobs, therefore we see decrease in demand because of other factors than price. Right? Here represents the original demand for that product. In this example, we're looking at ice cream cones. So original demand is D1. Now, there are factors that could cause the demand for ice cream cone to shift to the left or to shift to the right. So if it shifts to the right, which is D2, there's an increase in demand or decrease in the quantity demanded. If it shifts to the left, which is a backward shift, moving more closer to the zero, right, point, it means that there is a decrease in demand for that particular product. Right? And maybe you could think of some reasons why demand for ice cream cones will decrease. So at this point, for instance, we are in lockdown for many days. Yeah, ice cream is probably not highly demanded at this point. So therefore, ice cream cones is probably not going to be highly demanded also, right? Because that's a complementary good to ice cream. So there are many factors other than the price of the product itself that could have led to either an increase in demand or a decrease in demand. And we call this a shift in the demand curve due to non-price factors. Players or factors here helping to determine the price in an economy, right? So supply is also another factor that affects the market price of a given product. And supply refers to the quantity put on the market at a particular price at a particular time. So here we're looking now at the producer, and they deciding what quantity are we going to put out there on the market? What amount are we going to produce and make available on that market? Now, this is going to be a, a different curve as opposed to the demand curve. Remember, the demand curve had a downward sloping curve, right? Starting from left to right. The supply curve is a reverse to this, right? The supply curve starts at the 0 point and gives you an upward movement or upward moving curve. And that basically represents a direct relation between price and quantity supply. And what do we mean by direct relation? It means that whatever happens to price, the same happens to the quantity demanded, right? Remember, we are looking at the supplier or the producer and their decision as to how much to produce. So, for instance, if this producer is making their particular product and they notice that the price increased from 25 cents to 50 cents, they will therefore decide as supplier to supply more. Why? Because it gives them an opportunity to raise more in revenue and profits. So the supplier will supply more if the price is higher. The supplier will supply less if the price is lower. Will be supplied. Low price, low amount will be supplied. So there is a direct relationship here between price and quantity supplied. And this curve also shows you an illustration of how the curve moves within that example. In the original supply can move to the left or to the right, causing a decrease in supply or an increase in supply, right? So there are certain factors. A lot of businesses are moving away from old ways of producing and improving their production process using technology. And what this does, it leads to lower cost of producing. Remember, we talked about economies of scale. So they will be producing at a lower cost per unit. So improvement in technology means if you can reduce your cost of producing, now you can use that extra or surplus to produce more. And technology also helps you to increase your production, which means you can now increase your supply and at the same time bring in higher profits because your cost is lower. The factor prices. Remember we said there are four factors of production. So in the case of a producer who's making a product, like a manufacturer, they are looking at factors and the prices. If it drops, therefore you can now have lower costs of producing. So let's say you bought flour for your bakery. Flour would be a factor, a raw material that will lead to, if the cost of the flour drops, that will lead to lower cost for producing your products within your bakery. So therefore you can now supply more because you're now able to buy more raw materials and produce more and supply more of your products. Decrease in the price of a competing product. So if the producer realizes that a competing product, right, the price has been reduced, This also gives them an opportunity to sell more at the existing price, right? Increase in the number of firms in the industry. It also causes an increase in the market supply because now you have more firms that are providing that product, and that price of the commodity basically remains the same. So, business expectations, that is also a factor. If businesses think that, you know, the future is going to be good, they're going to be profitable, good investments will bring in returns to them, that will prompt them to even supply more and invest more. But if they think that, look, the future don't look too hopeful, we're going through this pandemic, we don't know what will happen, I am, better we reduce our supply and be safe and not be too risky at this point. So their expectations of the future as a producer can also have an implication on how much they supply, right? Um, Taking the last one, decrease in taxation, right? If government were to increase or decrease tax, that has an impact on your supply. So in this case, if government says we're going to reduce your taxes, right? Therefore, that will affect your costs as a business. It gives you a little more room now to produce more and increase your sales, right? So these are favorable. You notice that these factors are all favorable and would cause a business to make the decision to increase their supply. Now, what would cause the decrease in supply? So just to hint you, we are looking basically at the same factors, but in a more unfavorable situation. Going to be efficient, your costs will be high, therefore you cannot produce and supply great quantities as you want. Your prices of your goods that you buy in raw materials, they are high or increasing. That will lead to higher costs, therefore you cannot supply more, right? So all the same factors that we've looked at, basically we're looking at the unfavorable side of these factors now that will cause a business instead to decrease the amount that they're going to put out there or supply and make available for consumers to buy. Marketers use demand and supply to make their decisions. So demand and supply is plotted on a curve, and the point where both curves intersect become very useful to businesses, and that point is what we call the equilibrium price. This is the price where demand equals supply, hence the term equilibrium, right? So plotting both curves on the same graph, when they intersect, right? Intersect you to do now is to find out the meaning of these related terms: price elasticity, of demand, elastic demand, inelastic demand, unitary elasticity, price plateau, and product life cycle. Right, so these are a few related terms within the topic of determinants of price, which falls under marketing. Right, so check your Google Classroom and do whatever assignments ready, and stay posted for our next presentation.